The Billionaire Sheikh spoke Arabic. Everyone failed except the maid's daughter. The room fell silent when the Billionaire Sheikh suddenly switched to Arabic. One by one, confident faces froze, voices failed, and power collapsed into shame. Then, from the back of the hall, a soft voice spoke. Clear, fluent, fearless. No one expected it. She was only the maid's daughter. The marble-floored conference hall glittered with wealth and ambition. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished shoes, tailored suits, and carefully rehearsed smiles. This was not just an interview. It was an audition for destiny. The Billionaire Sheikh Rashid Al-Hamdan sat calmly at the center, his presence commanding silence without effort. Around him stood scholars, executives, and translators flown in from across the world. Each believed they were prepared. Each believed they were chosen. At the far corner of the hall, Aliyah stood quietly beside her mother, who wore a simple uniform and kept her eyes lowered. Her mother, Maryam, had worked in this palace for nearly 15 years, cleaning rooms where decisions worth millions were made. Aliyah had come only to wait. No ambition, no expectations. She held her mother's old notebook close, the one filled with handwritten Arabic verses practiced late at night. The sheikh began speaking in English, asking sharp questions. Candidates answered confidently. Then suddenly, without warning, his tone shifted. He spoke in Arabic, deep, poetic, and precise. The air changed instantly. One by one, voices cracked. Translators stumbled. Pride dissolved into panic. Aliyah felt her heartbeat slow. She understood every word. Confusion rippled through the room like a quiet storm. Men who had memorized speeches stared helplessly at the floor. The sheikh watched closely, his sharp eyes measuring more than language. He was measuring truth. Silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Miriam felt her daughter tense beside her. She whispered urgently, Aliyah, don't look up. Miriam knew her place in this world. She had learned it through years of bowed heads and quiet endurance. Speaking without permission could cost her job, perhaps more. But the sheikh spoke again, his Arabic sharper now, filled with cultural nuance and historical references. He wasn't testing translation. He was testing depth. Aliyah's fingers tightened around the notebook. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother whispering Arabic prayers after long shifts, correcting her pronunciation under dim lights, saying, knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. They had no tutors, no schools, only borrowed books and stubborn hope. The sheikh's gaze drifted across the room and finally landed on the back corner. Does anyone here truly understand me? He asked in Arabic. The silence screamed. Before fear could stop her, Aliyah took one step forward. The sound of her voice cut through the hall, soft, respectful, but unshaken. She answered in flawless Arabic, not just translating his words, but responding to their meaning. She referenced his metaphor, expanded it, and gently challenged his assumption with humility. Every head turned as Miriam's breath caught painfully in her chest. Fear surged through her veins. She had taught her daughter to be strong, but not reckless, not in a room where power could crush them without consequence. The sheikh leaned forward slightly. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but curiosity. He responded again, this time faster, deeper, using idioms only native speakers truly grasped. Aliyah replied without hesitation. Her voice trembled once, but only once. She spoke of dignity, of service, of how language was not power, but responsibility. She spoke as someone who had lived beneath privilege and learned wisdom the hard way. The hall was no longer watching a test. They were witnessing a revelation. One candidate scoffed quietly. She's just a maid's daughter, he muttered. The sheikh heard him and smiled slowly. Just a maid's daughter? The sheikh repeated calmly in Arabic. The scoffing man stiffened. The sheikh stood up, his presence filling the room like a rising tide. Do you know, he continued, how many empires were built by people no one expected? He turned to Aliyah. Where did you learn our language? Aliyah swallowed. From my mother. From books others discarded. from nights when dreams were cheaper than sleep. The Sheikh nodded once. Respect, not pity, crossed his face. He asked her about her goals. She answered honestly. She didn't seek wealth. She sought opportunity, a chance to serve with integrity, a chance to rise without forgetting where she came from. Miriam's eyes burned with tears she dared not wipe. The Sheikh addressed the room. You came prepared with credentials. She came prepared with understanding. His voice softened. That is rarer. In that moment, power shifted, not loudly, but permanently, and Aaliyah felt it. The interview ended early. The candidates were dismissed in stunned silence. Some left angry, some left ashamed. None left unchanged. The Sheikh asked Aaliyah and her mother to stay. Miriam's knees felt weak as she stood before a man who owned cities. She apologized repeatedly, fearing punishment. The Sheikh stopped her gently. You raised a daughter who speaks with wisdom. That is no small service. He offered Aaliyah a scholarship, mentorship, and a role in his foundation, one focused on education for unseen children like her. Not charity, responsibility. Miriam wept openly now. Years of sacrifice, of invisibility, finally seen. As they left the palace that evening, the sky burned gold with sunset. Aaliyah held her mother's hand tightly. For the first time, the world had listened, and everything had changed. News of what happened in the conference hall spread quickly through the palace corridors. Whispers followed Aaliyah as she walked beside her mother, some filled with awe, others with quiet resentment. People who had never noticed her existence now looked twice. Aaliyah felt the weight of it all pressing on her chest. Opportunity had arrived, but it didn't come without fear. That night, in their small servants' quarters, Miriam sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. I'm proud of you, she said softly, then hesitated. But pride doesn't protect us from the world. She had lived long enough to know how quickly favor could turn into punishment. Aaliyah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wondered if she had spoken too boldly, stepped too far out of line. Doubt crept in like a shadow. Who was she to sit at tables meant for the powerful? Who was she to believe she belonged there? Yet another voice answered inside her, the voice shaped by years of struggle. If I don't belong, why was I understood? She remembered the Sheikh's eyes, not judging, not mocking, but seeing. Outside, the palace lights glowed endlessly. Inside, a young girl stood at the edge of a new life, torn between gratitude and fear, knowing that the hardest part of rising was not the climb, but surviving what came after. The next morning, Aaliyah was summoned alone. The walk to the Sheikh's study felt longer than any journey she had ever taken. Her footsteps echoed against marble floors, each step questioning her courage. When the doors opened, Sheikh Rashid was standing by the window, looking out over the city he had helped build. You speak Arabic like someone who respects its soul, he said without turning. That cannot be taught easily. Aaliyah stood still, hands folded tightly. My mother taught me respect before words, she replied. He turned then, studying her carefully. Many people want power. Few understand responsibility. He asked about her childhood, her education, her sacrifices. She spoke honestly, about missed meals, borrowed books, and dreams whispered quietly so they wouldn't break. The Sheikh listened without interruption. Then he said something that shook her deeply. People will test you now. Some will try to humble you. Others will try to use you. Aaliyah nodded slowly. I'm not afraid of falling, she said. I'm afraid of forgetting who I am. For the first time, the Sheikh smiled not as a billionaire, but as a man who recognized courage. Not everyone celebrated Aaliyah's rise. Within days, criticism surfaced, subtle at first, then sharp. Some staff members questioned her sudden importance. Others whispered that she was a token, a spectacle. The same people who once ignored her now judged her every word. Aaliyah felt the sting deeply. She had expected challenges, but not the loneliness that came with standing alone. Even kindness felt cautious now, measured. She wondered if silence would have been easier. One evening, She found her mother sitting quietly, folding clothes with tired hands. Miriam looked up and smiled gently. "The higher you go," she said, "the louder the wind." Aaliyah knelt beside her. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Miriam reached for her face. "You were strong when no one saw you. That strength didn't come from approval. It came from love." Those words settled deep in Aaliyah's heart. She realized then that her worth had never depended on acceptance. It had been built in sacrifice, patience, and quiet resilience. The next day, she walked into her new role with her head held high, not because she felt powerful, but because she finally understood that dignity was something no one else could give or take away. Weeks passed, and Aaliyah immersed herself in her work at the Sheikh's Foundation. She visited underfunded schools, met children who reminded her of herself, and listened to stories shaped by hardship and hope. Each encounter strengthened her resolve. One afternoon, a young girl asked her, "Do people listen to you now because you're important?" Aaliyah paused, then answered gently, "They listened because I learned how to speak when no one cared." That night, she reflected on the irony of her journey. Power had not found her because she demanded it. It had found her because she had learned empathy. Every rejection, every silent night of studying by dim light, had prepared her for this moment. Still, doubt returned in quiet hours. She questioned whether she could live up to expectations. But then she remembered her mother's sacrifices, the Sheikh's trust, and the children watching her as proof that possibility existed. She understood now. Second chances are not just given. They are carried forward. And sometimes, the purpose of rising is not to escape the past, but to return with a light bright enough to guide others. On the anniversary of that unforgettable interview, the Sheikh invited Aaliyah to speak at a global summit. As she stood behind the podium, looking out at faces filled with power and privilege, her hands shook slightly, but her voice did not. She spoke in Arabic and English, weaving stories of compassion, education, and unseen strength. She spoke of mothers who clean floors so their children can dream higher, of daughters who learn quietly, waiting for a moment that may never come, until it does. The room listened. When she finished, applause filled the hall, not thunderous, but sincere. The Sheikh nodded in quiet approval. Miriam watched from the back, tears streaming freely. That night, Aaliyah stood beneath the same sky that once felt unreachable. She realized that life had not changed because she spoke Arabic. It had changed because she spoke truth, and truth, once heard, has a way of opening doors no wealth ever could. Success brought visibility, but also scrutiny. Aaliyah soon learned that being seen meant being questioned. Every decision she made at the foundation was examined, every word measured. Some donors praised her authenticity. Others doubted her credibility. "She's emotional," one advisor remarked. "Not strategic enough." Those words lingered longer than praise ever could. Late one evening, Aaliyah sat alone in her office, staring at a proposal she was afraid to approve. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her chest. If she failed, it wouldn't just reflect on her. It would confirm every doubt whispered behind closed doors. She thought of her mother scrubbing floors with aching hands, never once complaining. Miriam had carried responsibility without titles, without applause. That memory grounded her. The next morning, Aaliyah approved the proposal, funding a school in a forgotten village many considered not worth the investment. She trusted her instincts, shaped by lived experience. When the Sheikh questioned her choice, she met his gaze calmly. "Some returns aren't financial," she said. "Some are human." He studied her quietly, then nodded. "That," he replied, "is leadership." In that moment, Aaliyah realized that courage wasn't loud. Sometimes it was choosing compassion even when logic argued otherwise, and standing firm when the world waited for you to doubt yourself. The village school opened 6 months later. Children arrived barefoot, carrying hope instead of supplies. Aaliyah walked through the classrooms, her heart swelling with quiet pride. One child tugged at her sleeve and asked, "Are you the reason we can study here?" Aaliyah smiled gently. "No," she said, "you are." That night, she returned home emotionally drained but fulfilled. Miriam noticed immediately. She prepared tea, the same way she had done after long days of cleaning. Some habits, born of love, never faded. "I'm scared sometimes," Aaliyah admitted softly. "Scared I'll disappoint everyone." Miriam reached across the table. "You already succeeded," she said. "Not because you rose, but because you didn't forget us." Those words struck deep. Aaliyah realized that true success wasn't measured by distance from the past, but loyalty to it. In the weeks that followed, she began mentoring girls from backgrounds like hers. She listened more than she spoke, reminding herself that leadership was service, not status. And slowly, quietly, the world around her began to change, not because she demanded it, but because compassion has a way of reshaping spaces once ruled by silence. Not all wounds healed easily. One evening, Aaliyah overheard two executives questioning her appointment. "She's still just a maid's daughter," one said. "Let's not pretend otherwise." The words cut deeper than she expected. That night, she couldn't sleep. Old insecurities resurfaced, memories of being overlooked, underestimated, invisible. She wondered if no matter how high she rose, her past would always follow. The next day, she addressed the foundation staff openly. "I come from service," she said, "and I will never be ashamed of that. If that disqualifies me in your eyes, then I am still standing where I belong." Silence followed, then something unexpected. Applause. Not polite, honest. Later, Sheikh spoke to her privately. "People fear what disrupts their comfort," he said. "You remind them that privilege is not the same as worth." Aaliyah left the room lighter than she entered. For the first time, she stopped trying to prove herself. She understood now. Dignity doesn't ask permission, and self-worth doesn't need validation from those who have never walked your path. Years passed. The foundation grew, touching lives across borders. Aaliyah became a voice for children, for mothers, for the unseen. Yet, she remained grounded, returning home each evening to the same woman who had taught her everything. Miriam's hands grew weaker with age, but her spirit remained strong. One night, as Aaliyah helped her to bed, Miriam whispered, "I never dreamed this life for you. I only prayed you'd be safe." Aaliyah held her tightly. "You gave me more than safety," she said. "You gave me purpose." That night, Aaliyah reflected on sacrifice, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet endurance of love, the kind that cleans floors without complaint and teaches languages without classrooms. She realized that second chances don't always come with announcements. Sometimes they arrive disguised as responsibility. As she looked at her mother sleeping peacefully, Aaliyah knew that everything she had become was rooted in that quiet sacrifice, and honoring it would be her life's greatest responsibility. On a calm evening, Aaliyah was invited back to the same hall where everything had begun. This time, she wasn't standing in the shadows. She stood at the center. The Sheikh addressed the audience. "We often mistake status for value," he said. "Today, we celebrate someone who taught us otherwise." Aaliyah spoke briefly, her voice steady. She spoke of dignity, of mothers who work unseen, of children who learn in silence, and of kindness that reshapes destiny. When she finished, she looked toward the back of the hall, where her mother stood, eyes shining. That moment felt full circle. Aaliyah finally understood. Her journey was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to those like her that their voices mattered, and that sometimes the world changes, not when the powerful speak, but when the unheard are finally listened to. Time softened many things, but not the lessons Aaliyah carried. As years passed, she watched children from forgotten neighborhoods graduate, speak confidently, and dream boldly. Each success felt personal. Each failure reminded her how fragile opportunity truly was. One afternoon, she stood in a classroom where a young girl recited Arabic poetry with trembling confidence. The girl reminded her painfully of herself. After the class, the child asked, "Do people still look down on you?" Aliyah knelt beside her. "Some do," she said gently, "but they don't decide who I am." That night, she sat beside her mother, who was growing weaker. Miriam smiled softly. "You change more than lives," she whispered. "You change thinking." Aliyah held her hand, fighting tears. She realized that true legacy wasn't wealth or recognition. It was the courage passed quietly from one soul to another. And she understood something profound. The world doesn't move forward because the powerful allow it, but because the unheard refuse to remain silent forever. Miriam passed away peacefully one quiet morning, her hand resting in Aliyah's. There was no grand farewell, only love, memories, and gratitude filling the small room. At the funeral, people from all walks of life came: cleaners, teachers, scholars, children. Aliyah stood quietly, overwhelmed by the truth her mother had lived by. Service leaves footprints long after we are gone. Later that evening, Aliyah opened the old notebook, the one filled with Arabic verses practiced late at night. Tears blurred the ink, but the words remained clear. Her mother had never stood on stages, never spoken into microphones, yet her voice lived on, through her daughter, through every child educated, through every life touched. Grief weighed heavily, but it did not break Aliyah. Instead, it anchored her. She whispered softly, "I'll carry you forward." And she did. In honor of her mother, Aliyah launched a new initiative, the Miriam program, focused on educating children of domestic workers, migrants, and unseen laborers. Critics questioned it. Too emotional, they said. Not scalable. Aliyah smiled calmly. She had heard those words before. The first graduating class stood proudly 2 years later. Among them were children who once hid in corners, afraid to speak. Now they spoke with confidence in multiple languages, with clarity and courage. At the ceremony, Aliyah addressed them softly. "You don't need permission to belong," she said. "Your story matters." As applause filled the room, she felt her mother's presence, not as absence, but as foundation. She realized that love, when multiplied through purpose, becomes something eternal, and that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin quietly, with a mother teaching her child by candlelight. Years later, a young woman stood nervously at a podium, facing a powerful audience. Halfway through her speech, a man interrupted her in Arabic. The room went silent. The young woman smiled and answered fluently, confidently, without fear. Aliyah watched from the audience, tears forming in her eyes. History was repeating, but this time it was intentional. She understood then that her story had never been unique. It had simply been early. The cycle of compassion continued, one voice awakening another, and the world listened. Standing alone at sunset, Aliyah reflected on the journey that began with silence and ended with purpose. She had learned that dignity doesn't come from titles, and power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from truth, from love, from sacrifice, and from the courage to speak when no one expects you to. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, grateful not for where she stood, but for who she remained. The maid's daughter was never small. The world had simply forgotten how to listen. Some stories remind us that greatness often rises from the quietest places, that love, sacrifice, and courage can change destinies. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe, and join our family, where unseen voices are always heard.